At just past 4 in the morning, in the dark hours when even a battlefield sleeps a little, 12 small aircraft lifted off from a hidden launch site near Odessa. They had no pilots inside them, no names painted on their sides, no flags, just fuel, a warhead, and a flight plan built by people who had spent 3 years learning exactly how Russian air defense thinks. Their target was Saki military airfield, on the western coast of Crimea, and what happened over the next half hour would end with one of Russia's most heavily defended air bases burning from the inside out. This is the story of how that happened, not because it was luck, not because Russian soldiers were careless, but because a small, patient country found a weakness inside one of the most expensive and advanced air defense networks on Earth, and used it. To understand why this strike mattered so much, you have to understand what Saki Airfield actually was to Russia, and why Russia had just made a decision that, in hindsight, looks like a terrible gamble. For months, Ukraine had been running a quiet campaign around Crimea, not one dramatic strike, but a slow squeeze. Supply routes hit, radar stations damaged, ammunition depots destroyed one at a time, bridges targeted. The goal was never to capture Crimea overnight. The goal was to isolate it, to make the peninsula harder to supply, harder to defend, and harder to use as a launching pad for further attacks into southern Ukraine. Russia understood what was happening, and Russia responded the way any military power would respond to a threatened stronghold, by reinforcing it. In the days before this attack, Russia moved an additional squadron of Su-30 fighter jets into Saki Airfield. These aircraft were meant to patrol the skies over Crimea, protect the peninsula's air defense systems, and push back against exactly the kind of slow, grinding pressure Ukraine had been applying. It was supposed to be a show of strength. Instead, it created a much bigger target. Because now, sitting inside Saki's hangars, parked wingtip to wingtip, waiting to be fueled and armed, was a squadron of some of Russia's most capable fighter aircraft. Aircraft that take months to build and cannot simply be replaced. And Ukraine knew they were there. This is the part most people miss when they hear about drone strikes on airfields. It's not really about destroying a runway. Runways can be patched in a day. But the real damage, the damage that actually changes a war, is destroying the aircraft themselves, the maintenance equipment, the fuel supply, and the technical crews needed to keep a squadron flying. You don't need to flatten an airbase. You just need to hit the handful of things that make it function. And that was exactly the plan. Saki wasn't undefended, far from it. This was one of the most heavily protected pieces of airspace in the entire Crimean Peninsula, sitting inside a layered shield of Russian air defense systems, each one designed to catch what the last one missed. The outer layer belonged to the S-400 Triumph, one of the most advanced long-range air defense systems in the world. A single S-400 battery can track dozens of targets at once and fire missiles that cost roughly $2 million each. For comparison, each of the small Ukrainian drones in this attack cost a tiny fraction of that. On paper, this was not supposed to be a fair fight. 32 missiles were ready to be fired against 12 cheap drones. If this had been a simple numbers game, the outcome would never have been in doubt. But war is rarely a simple numbers game, and Ukraine had learned that the hard way, through years of trial, failure, and adaptation. The core idea behind the attack was simple to describe, even if it was difficult to execute. A modern air defense radar operator, no matter how advanced the equipment in front of him, can only process so many threats at once. Give him 12 targets appearing from different directions, at different altitudes, behaving in different ways, and even the best system in the world starts making trade-offs. Which target do you prioritize? Which one do you assume is the real threat? Which one do you gamble on ignoring? Ukraine built its entire attack around forcing the Russian defenders to make exactly those kinds of impossible choices, again and again, layer after layer, until the defenses simply ran out of good options. As the drone formation crossed toward Crimea, Russian long-range radar picked them up well before they reached the coast. This was expected. Ukraine never assumed these drones could sneak in unseen. Instead, some of the drones were used almost like bait, drawing attention and forcing the defenders to commit resources early, while the overall formation split apart and approached from multiple directions at once. The first exchanges did not go Ukraine's way. Russian air defense crews at the S-400 battery fired on part of the group and scored hits. Drones were lost. For a moment, it looked exactly the way the numbers suggested it should. An overwhelming, well-funded defense system swatting away cheap attackers. But this is where the story turns, and it's the part that matters most. Because while some drones were being shot down, others were doing something different. Some dropped low, close to the surface of the Black Sea, where waves, spray, and reflections make it far harder for radar to maintain a clean, reliable track on something small. It's a basic fact of physics that applies to any radar system in the world. The lower and smaller a target is, and the closer it flies to open water, the messier and less reliable the return signal becomes. Ukraine wasn't inventing a secret weapon here. It was exploiting something every military on Earth already knows and constantly works to counter. At the same time, other drones changed their flight paths in ways that confused the picture on Russian radar screens. Some appeared to threaten one target, then shifted their approach. Some briefly vanished from radar tracking altogether, only to reappear somewhere else a short time later. To the Russian crews watching their screens in the dark, still hours before sunrise, the picture kept shifting under their hands. This is the reality of modern drone warfare that a lot of people don't fully appreciate. It's not about one invincible weapon breaking through. It's about volume, timing, and confusion working together against systems that were originally designed to fight a handful of large, predictable aircraft, not a swarm of small, erratic ones. As the surviving drones pushed closer to Crimea, they ran into the next defensive layer, an S-350 Vityaz battery, a newer and more mobile Russian air defense system built specifically to deal with exactly this kind of low, fast, unpredictable threat. And for a while, it worked. The S-350 shot down more drones as they crossed into Crimean airspace, but every additional target that had to be dealt with cost time. Every drone that survived one layer only had to make it through the next one. And by this point in the attack, Russian air defense was no longer fighting one clean engagement. It was fighting a rolling, continuous problem, with new threats appearing from new angles, while the crews were still recovering from the last exchange. The surviving drones pushed further inland, toward the perimeter of Saki Airfield itself, where the final defensive layer waited. A Pantsir S-1 system, a short-range weapon built specifically to protect high-value sites like air bases, command posts, and fuel depots in the last few miles before impact. It combines missiles with rapid-fire cannons, and it is designed to be the last word in airfield defense, the system that catches whatever slips through everything else. For a short time, it did its job. Panzer crews shot down more of the incoming drones as they closed in on the base. But a defensive system that has been forced to engage wave after wave of targets, with less and less time between each engagement, eventually reaches its limit. At some point in this final stretch of the attack, part of the incoming group succeeded in reaching the Pantsir system's own position closely enough to damage it, knocking out its ability to track and engage further targets. Once that final layer of close-in defense went silent, there was nothing left standing between the remaining drones and the airfield itself. What followed happened in less than a minute. The surviving drones struck the hangar area of Saki Airfield, where Russia had concentrated its aircraft, ground equipment, fuel trucks, and maintenance supplies. Explosions tore through multiple hangar structures in quick succession. Fires spread rapidly through areas packed with fuel, oil, and munitions, feeding secondary explosions that continued for some time after the initial impacts. Reports from the scene described flames visible from a significant distance, thick black smoke rising over the airfield, and extensive damage across the hangar rows housing the newly reinforced squadron. Russian ground personnel, caught in the middle of the chaos, could do little more than take cover as the fires spread. The very aircraft that had just been sent to Crimea as reinforcement, the show of strength meant to secure the peninsula, were now sitting inside burning structures, unable to take off, unable to be repaired quickly, and in some cases unlikely to fly again at all. Now, here is why this single strike matters far beyond one burning airfield. Military aircraft are not like vehicles you can simply order more of and receive next week. Advanced fighter jets like the Su-30 take enormous amounts of time, specialized parts, and skilled labor to produce. Losing several of them, or even damaging them badly enough that they need extensive repair, represents a real and lasting blow to an Air Force's ability to operate. You cannot replace a squadron overnight, and every aircraft lost is one less available to defend Crimean airspace, escort other missions, or strike back at Ukrainian positions. There's also the matter of morale and confidence. Both for the defenders and for the wider Russian military command watching from a distance, Saki was not some minor, poorly defended outpost. It sat inside layer after layer of serious, expensive, modern air defense technology. If a single wave of low-cost drones could push through all of that and reach the aircraft inside, it raises an uncomfortable question that Russian commanders now have to sit with. How do you protect anything in Crimea if this is what it takes to stop 12 drones? That question ripples outward. Every other airbase, every radar site, every command post across occupied Crimea now has to be viewed through this same uncomfortable lens. Air defense crews everywhere on the peninsula know that the equipment protecting them faced exactly this kind of test, and that the outcome was not fully in their favor. That kind of doubt is difficult to fix with more missiles alone. For Ukraine, the value of this strike goes well beyond the physical damage at Saki. It sends a message deliberately and clearly that no part of Crimea is safe, simply because it sits behind Russia's most advanced weapons. It tells Russian commanders that reinforcing a base can just as easily turn that base into a bigger, more valuable target. And it forces Russia to make a difficult choice going forward. Spread air defense assets even thinner across more locations, hoping to cover every possible angle, or concentrate them and risk exactly this kind of concentrated loss happening again somewhere else. Neither option is comfortable. And that discomfort is, in many ways, the entire point of this kind of strike. Ukraine cannot match Russia's air force in a straightforward, symmetrical fight. It doesn't have the number of manned fighter jets, the depth of air defense coverage, or the industrial base to build them at the same scale. What it has built instead, out of necessity, is a different kind of warfare, one based on cheap, numerous, adaptable systems that can be produced quickly and used in ways that turn a defender's own size and cost against them. There's a broader lesson here that stretches well beyond this one night over Crimea, and it's one that military planners around the world are watching closely. For decades, air defense doctrine was built around the assumption that the attacker's aircraft would be expensive, few in number, and flown by pilots whose lives make every decision more cautious. Drone warfare breaks that assumption completely. When an attacking weapon costs a tiny fraction of the missile meant to stop it, and there is no pilot whose safety limits how aggressively it can be used, the entire cost equation of air defense changes. A country can, in theory, keep sending cheap drones until the defender either runs out of expensive interceptors or makes a mistake under the pressure of constant, repeated engagement. This is not a uniquely Ukrainian invention. It's part of a wider shift happening in modern warfare, one where drones, some simple and cheap, some more sophisticated, are reshaping what it means to defend a piece of territory. Saki Airfield is simply one of the clearest, most visible examples of that shift actually playing out in real combat against a real advanced air defense network with real consequences. For the Russian military, the aftermath of this attack likely means uncomfortable conversations at every level. Commanders on the ground have to explain how a heavily reinforced, multi-layered defensive position ended up with burning hangars and damaged aircraft. Officials further up the chain have to decide whether the answer is more missiles, more radar coverage, better training, or an entirely different approach to defending airfields that sit exposed on a peninsula surrounded by contested waters. None of those answers come cheap, and none of them come quickly. For the wider war, this strike adds another data point to a pattern that has been building for some time. Crimea, once treated by Russia as a secure rear base, safely behind the front lines, has increasingly become a place where nothing feels fully secure. Bridges have been targeted, fleet assets have been damaged, airfields have burned before, and now this. Each individual strike might be explained away as an isolated incident. But, taken together, they tell a much bigger story. The idea of Crimea as an untouchable Russian stronghold has been steadily worn away. Attack by attack, layer by layer. In almost exactly the same way, this single air defense network was worn down on this one early morning. And that, in the end, might be the most important part of this entire story. Not the specific hangars that burned or the specific aircraft that were damaged, but what this event represents for how this war is actually being fought and won. Ukraine cannot outspend Russia. It cannot outproduce Russia's air force. But it has shown, again and again, that patience, planning, and a willingness to accept losses in pursuit of a bigger objective can still find the cracks in even the most expensive defensive systems in the world. Somewhere in Crimea tonight, air defense crews are recalibrating their radars, reviewing what went wrong, and bracing for the possibility that this happens again. Because if this strike proved anything, it's that the peninsula Russia, once treated as safe ground, is no longer safe in the way it used to be. And for a military built around the idea that Crimea is untouchable, that realization may end up being more damaging in the long run than any single burning hangar ever could be.